Have you noticed it too? Every year, you make more money, but somehow you can afford less. There's this sinking feeling that no matter how hard you work, how much you save, or how many side hustles you pick up, everything just keeps getting more expensive, and you're falling further behind. You're not imagining it. Your money is losing value. This isn't about economics. It's about a rigged system designed to bleed you dry, one subtle, invisible cut at a time. Today, we uncover that mechanism and show you how to fight back. Just like most heists, this one also starts with a promise that sounds too good to be true. Throughout human history, politicians have discovered a powerful truth. Promising people free stuff is one of the easiest ways to stay in power. This idea of free appeals to most voters, but the harsh reality is that there's no such thing as a free lunch. For decades, politicians bought votes with promises they couldn't afford, funded not by today's taxes, but by tomorrow's debt. It was this debt that built roads, paid for wars, bailed out banks, and let past generations live the best of the American dream and enjoy cheap homes, stable jobs, and booming markets. But the bill was never paid. It was rolled forward again and again and again until it landed on your doorstep. Now you're footing the cost of prosperity you never got to enjoy. And we still keep kicking the can down the road, borrowing from a future that's already bankrupt. We've already spent tomorrow's money. Future tax revenue is already pledged to cover past promises, pensions, interest payments, and endless deficits. There's nothing left to borrow from that hasn't already been claimed. So instead of paying the bill, we print more money. But that comes at a cost. When the government prints more money, each dollar in circulation becomes a little less valuable. Think of it as coffee in a mug. Pouring more water into the mug dilutes the flavor. In the same way, pouring more money into the economy without increasing the actual value of the economy dilutes everyone's purchasing power. And our government has poured so much of water into the cup, we can barely taste the coffee anymore. Now, you might think that 2% of inflation doesn't sound significant, but this is where the concept of compounding comes in. Just like compound interest grows wealth, compound inflation erodes it. A 2% annual inflation rate over 5 years creates up to nearly 10% loss in purchasing power. Over 10 years, it's almost 20%. That $100 will still be there on paper, but when you go to spend it, it'll feel more like $80. Inflation persists because it creates just enough short-term good to be seductive. It fuels spending because people don't want to save money that will be worth less later. This spending drives economic growth and makes it look like everything is fine. But in reality, the average person is stuck in a no-win trap. Try to save, and inflation erodes your hard-earned money. The only other choice, with living costs constantly rising, is to keep spending just to survive. This endless spending helps you get by, but it also fuels a system designed to benefit the rich at your expense. It's the lower classes, driven by consumer culture and necessity, who unknowingly keep this cycle alive, feeding the very machine that's rigged against them. We're now addicted to the short-term benefits of inflation, and that's a serious problem. People can't seem to understand why, despite earning more, they're falling behind. Most of the innovations that make modern life convenient, like smartphones, air conditioning, and the internet, were made possible because people earned enough to take financial risks. Those investments in risky ideas brought huge societal benefits. But we should also talk about the downside. The issue is that the debt bubble has gotten so big that inflation now directly funds inequality. As the government piles on debt, it quietly inflates the currency to make that debt cheaper to repay. It's as if the government can legally print counterfeit money, money that isn't tied to any real value. And every new dollar they create makes the dollars you already have worth less. And this stolen purchasing power benefits someone else, usually the rich. Asset owners, the wealthy, see their stocks and real estate rise in value. Meanwhile, everyday people pay more for rent, food, and fuel while their wages lag behind. Regular taxes are at least debated in public. Inflation is a hidden tax with no vote, no debate, and no escape. And unlike income taxes, it hits the poorest hardest, those who can't hedge with assets or pass on costs. To make things worse, the inflation spiral encourages both individuals and governments to take on more debt. If dollars are losing value over time, repaying that debt in the future becomes easier. Borrow $20,000 today, and if the value of money declines, you're effectively repaying less in real terms. Savvy investors leverage this by using borrowed funds to buy appreciating assets. As the asset's value rises with inflation, the real cost of the loan falls. What many don't realize is that we're stuck in a self-reinforcing cycle of debt and decline. Since the 2008 financial crisis, the structural weaknesses of our economy haven't been fixed. They've been papered over with even more borrowing. Instead of addressing the root problems, like stagnant wages, broken supply chains, or unsustainable housing costs, governments and central banks simply printed money, lowered interest rates, and issued more debt to keep the system afloat. On the surface, things look stable, but underneath, the cracks only got wider. When wages stagnate but consumption continues, that gap gets filled with credit. Governments and households alike have been using debt to fake prosperity. Each boom and bust cycle brings a bigger bailout, a bigger stimulus, and a bigger bill. But nothing truly gets solved. We're just digging the hole deeper. Let's take a closer look. The US government debt now exceeds 100% of GDP. If we add private sector debt, we're over 220%. If GDP grows 2% a year and interest on the debt also rises by 2% per year, then all our economic growth just covers interest payments, not progress, not innovation, and certainly not prosperity. The Federal Reserve is here to monetize this debt by buying it, creating new money in the process, but that newly created money doesn't improve real productivity. It ends up chasing assets, inflating prices of stocks, housing, and corporate valuations, making the rich richer, while leaving the average person behind. It's a shell game disguised as growth. At the same time, we've driven down the cost of goods through labor arbitrage, outsourcing jobs to countries with cheaper labor. Great for corporate profits, devastating for local workers. The people who once built cars and appliances now compete with wages overseas. The factories close, the company's stock prices goes up, and shareholders, not workers, reap the rewards. This model feeds inequality. The asset-owning class celebrates higher returns, while the working class faces job losses, wage stagnation, and rising despair. And to make things worse, we've become obsessed with avoiding recessions at all costs. Recessions are painful, but they're also necessary correctives. They reset the economy, force out inefficiencies, and provide an opportunity for rebuilding. In contrast, avoiding recessions at all costs, through unchecked borrowing and printing, risks a much darker fate: societal breakdown. And while inflation and debt quietly bleed your savings, the real structural risk lies in the very system that holds your money: the banks. 2008, it took the collapse of over 500 banks to wipe out over $700 billion in assets. In 2023, it took just 4 US banks, including Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, First Republic, and Silvergate, to wipe out $540 billion in assets almost overnight. That's not because those 4 banks were uniquely reckless, it's because our entire system has become dangerously concentrated. In the 1980s, the 5 largest US banks held just 10% of all banking assets. Today, they control nearly 50%. So when one of them stumbles, the fallout is immediate and massive. We're masking this fragility with emergency rate cuts, backdoor bailouts, and money printing. When Silicon Valley Bank failed, the government didn't let the market take the loss. They stepped in to guarantee deposits above the insured limit. And how did they pay for that? By quietly creating more money. Again. But here's the part that rarely gets discussed. Modern banks don't just move money, they manufacture it. Through fractional reserve lending, they take in your deposits and then create new money by issuing loans far beyond what they actually hold. That means new dollars are constantly being conjured into existence, not backed by productivity, but by more debt. And here's the kicker: most of the new money banks create isn't going to small businesses or making your community stronger. It's chasing assets, like houses, office buildings, stocks, and bonds. And naturally, if the amount of money in the system keeps going up, but the number of houses or shares of stock stays the same, prices are almost guaranteed to rise. It's like doubling the number of bidders at an auction without adding more items. Everyone ends up paying more. Right now, banks have trillions tied up in real estate alone, roughly 20% of their deposits. That's a huge fire hose of new money spraying into a limited supply of assets. The result? Asset bubbles that make those who can afford to own a property richer, while your paycheck stays the same, and the cost of buying a home or investing for your future keeps climbing out of reach. The worst part of this is that if there were a real run on the banks, if everyone tried to pull their money out at once, they simply wouldn't have it. That's because banks are only required to keep a small percentage of your deposits, typically less than 10%, on hand in liquid cash. The rest? They lend it out, invest it, or leverage it for more profits. So for every $100 you see in your account, the bank may only have $5 to $10 in actual withdrawable cash. The rest is tied up in loans and risk assets. And in practice, many large banks are leveraged far beyond even that, using complex instruments and derivatives to stretch each dollar further. It works fine. until it doesn't.
As the financial system gets riskier and more fragile, not everyone is suffering equally. Some are losing purchasing power by the day. Others have found ways to turn the system into a wealth generation machine. Let's start with the winners, the ultra-wealthy. They've effectively figured out how to eliminate income tax, not through loopholes, but by playing a different game entirely. 1. They buy appreciating assets, like stocks or real estate. 2. Instead of selling and triggering taxes, they borrow against those assets. 3. They use paper losses to help offset any taxable gains. 4. The debt is rolled over again and again. 5. They pay interest and avoid taxes until they die. When they die, the assets are passed on to heirs tax-free, thanks to step-up basis laws and trust accounts that protect wealth from taxation. This strategy, often called buy, borrow, die, effectively sidesteps the entire income tax system. But while the rich are preserving wealth through debt, the average person is getting squeezed by it. Owning a home used to be a symbol of stability. Today, it's a high-stakes gamble. Real purchasing power isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in goods and services. If your money can't buy what it used to, you're getting poorer, no matter what your paycheck says. This is why average people are being pushed into the stock market, not to grow wealth, but simply to avoid falling behind. But risky assets aren't a safe bet for everyone, because they carry volatility that many can't afford. With trust in traditional systems fading, people are searching for alternatives, something that can store value without being manipulated or inflated away.
Once you understand how inflation works, a few uncomfortable questions naturally follow. Why can the government print money but you can't? If printing solves problems, why do we need taxes? If debt doesn't matter, why not print forever? The truth is, governments can print money, but they do so at great risk. Currency only works if people believe in it. Print too much, and that belief collapses. That's why taxes exist, to keep money circulating, to give it value, and to limit the need for constant printing. It's also why printing can't go on forever. Sooner or later, the value of the money itself begins to erode. Which brings us to the real issue, productivity. Because money printing isn't inherently bad if it's backed by real growth, if the economy produces more goods and services to match the new money supply, inflation doesn't take hold. But when productivity stagnates, every extra dollar becomes less valuable. Since 2008, the global economy has papered over stagnation with debt. Governments borrowed, central banks printed, and the real economy limped along. Wages stayed flat, inequality widened, and asset prices soared. But underneath all of it lies a gamble. That future productivity will save us. The hope is that innovation, especially AI, will allow us to grow our economies faster than we're growing our debt. If we can raise annual productivity growth from 2% to 4% or more, we might outpace inflation, raise real wages, and pay off our debts in a way that feels almost painless. In a sense, we're making the same bet as a startup. Borrow heavily today, bank on explosive growth tomorrow. As Ray Dalio warns, every empire in the history of humanity eventually prints so much money that it ends up hyperinflating its currency. When debt piles up beyond what can be repaid, a nation faces two brutal options: cancel a debt or default. But most people don't realize what debt really is. Debt is time, borrowed. It's not just numbers on a screen. It's someone working a shift, building a house, fixing a car, trading their limited hours today for a promise that'll be worth something tomorrow. When that promise gets broken, when inflation wipes out the value or repayment never comes, it's not just money that's lost, it's stolen time. And history is crystal clear. When time given isn't repaid in dollars, it gets repaid in something far worse, in lives. Because if the system can't settle the debt with money, it settles it with blood. Time given always equals time taken. One way or another, the bill always comes due. The central theme behind all these issues is time. Inflation steals time by reducing the value of your past labor and future savings. You can already feel it. Groceries cost more, housing feels impossible, and every year it takes more hours to keep the same life. Every hour you work is a piece of your life you'll never get back. When a nation runs out of money, it eventually runs out of time. And when time runs out, civilizations fall. The only question is whether we let the clock run out or fight to reset it.